everyone. Good evening. My name is Rebecca Lemos Otero, and I'm the Executive Director of Humanities DC. We are an organization based in DC that supports anything around humanities, history, culture in our great city. Tonight, I'm excited that we're going to have a Humanitines panel, and I'm about to introduce our awesome panelists. But wanted to let anyone else know out there that if you are also interested in exploring something around DC history and you're just looking for that grant opportunity to help you get it off the ground, definitely check us out and learn more about our work. So, I'd like to introduce Folashade Pine, and she is a third-generation Washingtonian of both American and Nigerian heritage. As a product of two worlds, she passionately centers justice for Black people in her work. Folashade studied political science at North Carolina A&T State University. After graduating during the Great Recession, Folashade's journey led her to work in education, teaching at DC Public Schools, teaching DC Public School students. Over the past 7 years, her career focus has been in issue advocacy at nonprofit organizations, specializing in gun violence prevention, healthcare, social impact, and racial justice. Folashade is the host and executive producer of Unscripted Conversations, which is where we are this evening. I want to do a shout out and thank you to everyone who joined us today in person and everyone out in the internet world. Unscripted Conversations is a revolutionary experience for Black people who have complex conversations about our community in a safe space. The conversations are interactive and will conclude with solutions. Panelists will discuss what we can do at an individual level, a systemic level, and what we can take home to implement with our families. So with no further ado, I'd love to introduce our host tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And everybody who's here, thank you so much for being with us. Today we'll be discussing the topic of gentrification in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. And this is my hometown. This is a city where I grew up, my mother grew up, and also my grandmother grew up. And so this conversation tonight hits home. One of the things that I've noticed with gentrification is that it hits home for native Washingtonians, D.C. natives, to a different extent that a lot of people who are newer residents don't quite understand why we're so protective of our city and of our culture. I've witnessed firsthand the transformation of my city, the beautification of parts of my city where I've gone to places where I'd never visited in the past. I've seen the rise of luxury apartments, fast food, and high-end restaurants, new grocery stores. And so when you look up the literal term, the definition of gentrification, it's not a horrible thing. It literally means the making of something more refined, respectable, or polite. And so what we see, the beautification of DC aligns with that. But the reality of gentrification is that it's a mass displacement, removal, and uprooting of people, Black people, Black businesses, and the culture of this city. The cost of rent prices and home prices have skyrocketed over the past couple of decades. In 2019, DC was declared the most gentrified city in the nation. At the same time, mass incarceration plays a great role with this. And when a lot of our people are locked in cages and come back to the city, they don't recognize the place. It's completely transformed for the good and for the bad. And so tonight we'll be exploring the many aspects of gentrification. So with that said, let's get into the conversation. Oh, I'm sorry, before we get into the conversation, we have a short video which will bring us into this topic. Thank you.
Anybody can become homeless at any time. Homelessness does not discriminate.
This is not the usual conversation starter, but when gentrification is a hot topic pouring over the chocolate city, this statement becomes a reality. Merriam-Webster describes gentrification as the process of making someone or something more refined, polite, or respectable. But we also know it as poor urban area being changed by wealthier people moving in, improving housing, adding new businesses, and displacing current inhabitants in the process. In the district, low-income residents are being pushed out of the neighborhoods at some of the highest rates in the country, according to the Institute on Metropolitan Opportunity. Neighborhood disputes have created huge movements in retaliation to the fast-changing demographics. Certain areas in Ward 6 have seen more than a 75% of their lower-income residents disappear. You can witness the juxtaposition of rundown buildings right next to freshly renovated ones. Houseless people sleeping right under luxury apartments.
DC is an enormous budget. We have $100 million housing trust fund that they can extrapolate money from for the budget. So it's just a matter of combining resources with other nonprofits who are engaging in the same activity and have the same goals.
Which brings us to our discussion today. Does gentrification create the American dream? Or does the displacement caused by these changes cause a neighborhood nightmare? Hosted by Falashade Pine, who will speak with America's go-to money coach and investment expert, Saiga Thomas, who teaches people about how to invest, eliminate debt, attain financial freedom, and begin a path to financial literacy and independence through Madewell. Kelsey Adams, who also has a finance background, but is now the executive director for Long Live Go-Go, where they produce artistic activism events like Mochella, where go-go music is used as the intersection to politics and culture. Shirkiyama Jarima is an independent filmmaker, Howard alumni and former professor that currently owns the landmark Sankofa Cafe bookstore right across from the university. She directed a documentary on housing displacement in D.C. from the 70s called Brick by Brick and has since experienced an encounter with gentrification surrounding the bookstore. Daniel Del Pilago is a DJ, an immigrant, and a father, but he is also an organizing director for Empower DC, where he hopes to support staff organizers in pushing their campaigns and organization forward as a whole. Each panelist brings their own experiences and ideas for how to address gentrification as a whole and how to move forward as a community. Let's get into this unscripted conversation.
All right, and we're back. So for those in our audience who are watching live, they weren't able to hear about our panelists, so we're going to jump right into it and introduce our panelists. To the left of me, we have Kelsey Adams, who is the executive director of Long Live Go-Go. We have Daniel Del Piago, who is an incredible activist at Empower DC. And last but not least, we have the incredible Saiga Thomas, who is a real estate, superhero in DC. And so the first question that I have for you all is, what brought you to DC? Who are you first? And what brought you to DC and how long you've lived here? So I want to start with Kelsey.
Hi, everybody. I am glad to be here. Shout out to all of you in person and online that are joining us. So great to be out this beautiful Thursday evening. But let's get right into the conversation. I am Kelsey. Unfortunately, Falashade only said one of my titles, so I wear actually a ton of hats, so I'm going to have to shout them out to explain who I am. I am the executive director of Long Live Go-Go. I also serve as the program director of DC Vote, and I also am the presenting associate of Capital Bop. And I'm currently the managing director of a festival called Next Fest, which is next Saturday. So who I am right now is the managing director of Next Fest, and the theme of that festival is DC statehood. All of the organizations that I represent all work in some capacity to uplift this fight for DC statehood and demand that Congress grants DC residents DC statehood. You asked what brought me here. It was my mother. She's a great woman, so thankful for all the things that she does. And what brought me to the fight specifically was not my mom, though. She did bring me to D.C., obviously, because she had me, a proud product of Dunbar Senior High School. So, right here in the D.C. neighborhoods, DCPS proud graduate. But I attended Virginia Commonwealth University, and while I was there, I served as an intern for the Democratic Party of Virginia. And there I realized that the same opportunities that the residents of Virginia are afforded are not afforded to those of D.C. And to really, feel what that felt like, graduating from college, like figuring out what I was going to do in my career professionally. I majored in political science, and so to know like the height of my career in D.C., where we house Congress, the Capitol, the president, the height of my career as a resident was going to be city council. Unfortunately, the mayor is just not the highest ranking public official anywhere else. And so to really like internalize what that means and what that looks like after, again, just studying this as a major, thousands of dollars into my education, to realize that what I studied really kind of didn't pertain to my lifestyle. My internship, again, highlighted that fact because at the time, Tim Kaine was running for the vice president of the United States of America. Again, something that DC residents normally probably wouldn't do because they don't have any like political structure to do so. Like they never served in the Senate, they never served in the House, so like they have no guidelines to really do anything like that. And so again, internalizing all this information brought me into the fight. But I'm going to go ahead and kick it to my guy Daniel to my right.
Thank you. Thank you to Unscripted, to everyone here for having us this evening. My name is Daniel Del Pielago. I'm an organizer with Empower DC. I'm actually originally from Peru. I was born in Peru in South America. My family immigrated here in 1980, and we landed in Northern Virginia. As soon as I could get myself into the district, I was always here in the district, you know, hitting up all the nightlife, all of the just the culture. And then when I could afford to live in the district, I finally moved here into the district. I initially moved to the Eastern Market neighborhood. Most recently, I lived at the Ella Jo Baker Intentional Community Co-op, which is right in this neighborhood, which has shaped a lot of my thinking around housing and access to housing and how affordable housing should be. And of course, the work that I do in the district. Now, I'm a proud PG resident of no longer in the district. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
My name is Saiga Thomas. I'd like to thank Unscripted for having me join this conversation this evening. I'm originally from Los Angeles. Moved here nearly 20 years ago when I joined the State Department as a diplomat. I was based here in Washington and worked in several countries, Dominican. And over that time, I then started acquiring real estate in Washington, D.C. Fast forward to now, this is primarily what we focus on, residential commercial real estate and real estate.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing more about yourselves and your background. Now let's get into gentrification. How have you personally been impacted by gentrification? And I want to start by first framing it. Everyone has a different impact. Everyone is impacted differently, even though we are all a part of this system. This is a systemic issue. It's not an individual issue. We're all a part of it, but our experiences are different. So I want to start with, I want to kick it back to Saiga. So as someone who, we could say profits from the system of gentrification, how has the change in the city affected you and your business?
No doubt. As a developer, you know, it's undeniable. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I haven't been able to find opportunities via development in the cities. You know, we first bought our first property back in 2005 here in Washington, and Washington was completely different at the time. I remember I came in from New York, and the taxi cab driver warned me not to pass Logan Circle going towards you know, northeast side, and said, "Be careful. You know, this is the city. You don't want to come over here." Obviously, it's a different story today. If you're living in Logan Circle, you know, you're paying thousands of dollars in rent and so forth. Look, this DC has developed tremendously in the last 15 to 20 years. There's no doubt. And a lot of the developers have obviously been behind a lot of that, going into certain areas or markets that were undeveloped at the time or blighted at the time, have created development, which has obviously brought in a different demographic, good or bad. And I think that's obviously a topic that we'll touch upon this evening. But for myself as a developer, being able to go into areas that are undeveloped and obviously acquire land or houses, redevelop them, or sell them or hold on to them, we've been able to profit, and has led to our growth as a company. But I think there's obviously, you know, positive aspects to that side, and so, you know, obviously I can touch upon that as we go forward.
Thank you for that. And I do want to make sure that we're, you know, seeing both sides of the conversation. That's why I'm so glad Saiga's here today. I'm someone who also benefits from the system in a sense, even though I'm a native, some may consider me gentrifying because I live in luxury apartment buildings, right? We're all a part, we're involved in this system, we all play different roles. But another side of those luxury apartment buildings are a lot of newer tenants who come here and aren't used to the culture. They're not used to people playing go-go in the streets. And so I want to pass it over to Kelsey, who led an incredible movement here when some of the newer residents were against the culture of the city that they moved into. And so Kelsey, I want you to tell us about the Mochella movement.
You know, it's so funny that Kelsey and go-go music are synonymous at this point in my life. Piggybacking on myself, I am a Northeast native, but I currently live in the U Street neighborhood. I also am the chair of the U Street Neighborhood Association. I'm the youngest African-American voice inside of that organization as well. So how I experience gentrification is probably just, I would say, very different from anyone else. So I feel like firsthand, I probably didn't necessarily experience it. My mom was a paralegal. Growing up, I chose to not go to private school. Like, I just kind of begged my mom to not send me to St. John's. I said I want to go to Dunbar, and so I went to Dunbar. But if I would have wanted to go to St. John's, I could have went to St. John's. But what I did notice was when I was in my boss's office and the situation happened with the Metro PCS incident, that it wasn't necessarily the music that was the issue. It was the plight of, to be clear, white people moving into what used to be a predominantly black neighborhood. And I did want to clarify that definition of gentrification. So Merriam-Webster does read a very beautiful definition of gentrification at this point, that it's all polite and redeveloping neighborhoods, X, Y, and Z. Oxford decided to go the extra mile and really make it for what it is today, and it's the plight of wealthy people moving into urban areas with the influx of new businesses. And the detriment of that is that the natives, what would have been current inhabitants of those areas, are not able to afford those new businesses. And so what we saw that happened with the Metro PCS situation was people who probably have phones that are Metro PCS phones. Like, let's be clear, most people have a phone plan, iPhone, paying a monthly, lease fee for your phone. Yeah. I know most people don't even own their iPhones. And so when you talk about, the real underlining of what's going on in these communities is most people are living off credit. So wealthier people are living off credit. People who are natives or inhabitants to an urban community are probably utilizing community resources that were already there, including Metro PCS phones, including Social Security phones that Metro PCS stores gives out for the elderly, okay, who can't afford a phone plan at all. And so I think that we try to put like beautiful wording around what's really happening. But if you dig deep and really understand, what's happening, you see that it's not just necessarily this surface level, oh, these people are coming in, but it's a displacement of not only politics, but of culture. And so the culture that already exists in a community is going to be displaced when you have, quote unquote, wealthier people, because wealthy is also, again, a mindset. It's a piece of paper. But your actual mind could be wealthy and you just have no paper to back that up. And so in my opinion, culture is more of a tangible, lucrative thing that somebody can make income off of than paper. If you have $100, you can't just remake $100. You can't go to a print shop, and make $100 and that's a liable piece of paper. No. But you can use culture and use that economically to benefit yourself. And so I feel the influx of the people who come in recognize the culture, realize that the people who live here were benefiting off their culture, and now they decided that silencing that culture will also silence that group of people.
Thank you for sharing that, Kelsey. And I want to also pass it over to you, Daniel, to talk about your experience. And I know this is the work that you do every day at Empower DC, but also would love to hear about that, but also how it's impacted you personally.
Sure. On a personal level, I would say not as much, in the sense that, I'm an immigrant to this country. I grew up in Northern Virginia. As I mentioned, when I could afford to live in the district and move into my friend's basement, that's what I did. Most recently, as somebody who has lived here a significant amount of time, when my daughters were getting bigger, and we started thinking of more space, it just didn't make sense for us, with our budget, with what we could afford, to actually buy in the district because it's just so expensive. So it's kind of like it's poor us, but I think on a personal level. Now, what I've seen through the work is a lot what my colleague here, Kelsey, has mentioned is really, this fight for land is what it's come down to. And that translates into culture. And so what I've seen is a movement that's been block by block. You could even say building by building, block by block, ward by ward, neighborhood by neighborhood, where development has encroached on people who have lived here for a significant amount of time, have shaped the city to what it is, and now we're seeing people extracting the benefits of this land. So it was interesting. On my ride here, I Ubered here, and I came in from PG, so I came in around Howard, and we went past the first building that I ever organized in, 1111 Columbia Road, which was a building that went up for sale back in the day. We were unable to buy it, but we were able to set some things in motion to hold on to it. So to me, that's kind of like the big fight right now is like, how do we even just hold on to what we have? That still gives us a sense of what the city used to be, that helps the people who have helped to shape the city to remain here. So yeah, it's been sad, to be honest. Like I have to use such a simple word because it's just sad to see the loss of people's culture, the loss of people, the loss of land. Just one quick story. I remember doing outreach up here at Georgia Avenue, and this was when they had knocked down Bruce Monroe School that used to be right on Georgia Avenue, right there between Irving and Columbia. And I'm standing there doing outreach because we had been fighting, the city who had promised the new school. Then they knocked it down, and we're sitting there trying to talk to the neighborhood folks. And this gentleman is walking back towards me, and he's just really angry. And as he gets closer, I can hear him talking. And he's like, man, I missed the damn stop. I just got home, and I couldn't recognize where I was. Just got home is colloquial for he probably just came out of jail. And he didn't see that landmark. He didn't see that thing, and it had changed his view of the city. So that always really sticks with me, how quickly the city has changed and how many people are seriously affected by it.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that point. I do remember Bruce Monroe. I went to Banneker High School, DC Public School graduate. Yes. Okay. Glad to hear we have members of our studio audience who have connections to that incredible school as well. But yeah, Bruce Monroe, I used to pass it on the way home. And I was just in that area the other day, and I forgot that was a whole school. Now it's a park, and there's a dog park there as well. But I think
and it's interesting because that plot of land, when they tore it down, the then council member Jim Graham said it was interim use. This park would be interim use. Now it's tied to the redevelopment that's happening a little bit up the street, the Park Morton Public Housing. So they are going to actually some of that park in that land will be used to build so-called replacement housing for the Park Morton redevelopment. So it gives you an insight as to, I guess there's like the definition of gentrification. I think an added layer to that is the I don't want to say collusion because maybe it is the collusion between government and developers and investors into changing neighborhoods. Right? They saw this piece of land for its long-term use and are now cashing in.
Yeah, and I think that you bring up a really good point about collusion. Gentrification is a team sport, and I think when we have this conversation, it's important to go back and look at the history. It didn't start with Bowser. Bowser, our mayor, is very developer-friendly. However, this didn't start with her. This started decades ago with mayors like Fenty, mayors like Anthony Williams, who set the stage for where we are today. And I think it's really important to always look back to understand where we're going. My mother, who grew up in this city, told me that when she was in her 20s, she came across something called the DC Development Plan. And in that plan, it said that by the year 2000, DC would only be for the wealthy. It would not be the city that it was in the 70s, when there was a predominantly black city, when it was considered Chocolate City. And there's been a lot of change in that history over the years. In 2015 was when DC was declared no longer Chocolate City, because the number of non-black residents exceeded how many black residents there were. Right now, we are seeing those trends change. So there was a report that recently came out with News One in this past July that spoke about how the pandemic actually shifted the number of black people who are still in the city and actually caused a certain white flight out of the city. So it's very interesting just to see that. But I think the conversation is more complex than just black and white. It's about the removal of people and the government making business deals that are prioritized over the well-being of the people. And so I guess we can all look at our different approaches to how to address gentrification, but who do you all think are the true villains? Do you think it's the government? Do you think it's the businesses? Do you think it's the newer residents who are coming in from Montana and Wisconsin and who are not concerned about the history and are just here to make their money and leave? Who do you think are some of, and maybe we don't use the word villains, but who do we think are some of the people who are responsible? I do think it's a team sport, but who do you think could be looked at as an entity that needs to be addressed in this issue? And I'll let anyone jump in, whoever's ready. We're all looking around.
In our experience, it has been, in Power DC, we do a lot of work around public housing, which is federally owned land. There's the local government is also involved in it. And what we've seen is, once again, this collusion between local government and private developers. So what the city recently did, I had mentioned Park Morton, along with Berry Farm, which is a historic black neighborhood here in the district. It was a neighborhood where formerly enslaved black people pooled their resources together, bought the plantation from Berry, and created this neighborhood, Berry Farm Hillsdale. Then through the years, through the highways and all of that, a lot of that land was taken, and in the 40s, they built public housing there. The city has created this program called the New Communities Initiative, which is a hint at what's happening there. So the city and the theme there, the narrative is that because this public housing is so run down, that we now, and because our local government can't invest and the federal government is getting out the game, which they are, we need private funders to rebuild these neighborhoods, to redevelop them and create new neighborhoods, and deconcentrate poverty. I always think that that's a deconcentration of power, where we've seen black neighborhoods, black communities come together. There's been some move to deconcentrate that potential power that exists there. So to us, it's fairly clear that the government is playing a huge role in allowing developments to take place that not only displace people but erase history. At Berry Farm, we've done a lot of work to preserve that history. We actually were able to get a historic designation at Berry Farm. The city fought us tooth and nail to not get that designation. It's interesting that just recently, when they announced that they're breaking ground, the mayor is saying this historic neighborhood, they were fighting us for that not to happen. They wanted to literally, it would have been erased. That history would have not been there. So for us, a key player is the local government, and then of course the developers that aren't there with a value set and are there to extract as much money as possible. So, and then we see that revolving door because we've seen quite a bit of people who work for the local government also working with developers and back and forth. So those are two key players, I think, that we can't, that we have to realize.
Definitely, and I think I want to pass it to Saigon and hear your perspective. And I know you have interest in financial education and helping people to be in a better place financially to actually benefit from the new development happening. So I want to pass it to you.
So, gentrification is not unique to DC. That's the first thing I want to make sure it's clear. Gentrification takes place any corner of the world you go in right now. The same conversation could be had, right, regarding that city specifically. I think it's interesting. I'm listening to some of the words that are being sort of lobbied out there, such as villain, or the government allowing developments to take place. 'Cause I look at it in a different way.
Okay.
I look at it as collaborations, partnerships, facilitating development. I think it's important to recognize that governments should not be in the business of building developments. Right? That is not their main business. It is saying, we're going to come in, get an architect, and we're going to hire a contractor to go build. Right? They're not efficient, and it should be left over to private companies. That way, your tax dollars are invested in a more efficient way. There is no winner in this. I think the biggest victim in this is the culture itself. I think that's really who's losing out on it. But I think it's difficult to say this is the proponent, this is the person who is responsible for it. I think it takes a little bit of everything, and I'm going to give you an example. I get pretty much every week maybe an email or call from a resident looking to sell their home. So they call me and say, hey, we've been here for 20, 30 years. We know you did this development. We like the way that development came out. We would like to sell our home. Are you interested? That's not me calling them.
Wow.
That's not me, looking to buy their home. But this is them making a decision saying, at this point in our life, we no longer, remember, DC has changed in 40 years as well. There are a lot of people who live in DC. It's different. Traffic is a lot. There's a lot of people concentrated into a small area. So in some cases, people just simply want to leave. And so instead of necessarily just putting their house on the market, they call a developer, and you see sort of these neighborhoods changing. I think that it's sad to see some of these neighborhoods change in such a great way. Right now we're building a project in a neighborhood where 15 years ago, it was 96% black. I think they did a recent study, and now it's like 47% black. That's not what I want to see. And so I think the goal of everyone, and I'm hoping this is what this conversation is about, is, what can we do to change this? What can we do to make sure that culture remains, that people who want to stay in their homes can stay, that rents are not going into a position where they can no longer afford, or condos, when these new condo developments come in, they're simply unattainable. And so that's sort of just my 2 cents.
And I'm glad you brought up the situation of homeowners calling you. I've always known the absolute reverse of black homeowners being harassed daily. We have a family home that we unfortunately had to sell. It was on Kansas Avenue in Northwest. My grandparents owned that home. And when my aunt who owned the home, who was the last owner of the home, when she passed away, developers were knocking on the door every day. They were calling, harassing my family to get us to sell the home. And I've heard that side of the story. It's so important that we have this conversation, because I've never been aware of individuals contacting developers. I've only seen that other side. And unfortunately, when it comes to elderly black people who may have had this home for the duration of their life, the majority of their life, a lot of them are in the position where there are tax liens that are causing them to lose their homes. There are situations where they may have paid their home off in full, but because of rising property taxes due to the change in environment, they are no longer able to afford that home that they paid for outright. And I know, Daniel, in some of your work, you all work with evictions and also just people being displaced. So if you could touch a little bit on that, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, so I agree with the brother here. I think the goal is to figure out how do we do sustainable developments, right? Unfortunately, in a project like Berry Farm, what we've seen is It started about 20 years ago as an idea, the city council approving this idea of the New Communities Initiative. Over the past couple of years, we've seen the displacement of the people. We still don't know when people will come back. They're building one senior building right now in the first phase redevelopment. That means people could potentially be away 5, 10, 15 years by the time they may have the opportunity to return, because they also don't have a right, an actionable right of return. Like they can't go to court and say if somebody tries to stop them from returning. So, you know, what we see is people just, being displaced. People being displaced through development, through conditions, right? I think that's the other big thing that we see is people just. I've been working with a woman whose ceiling caved in. She lived up in Southeast DC. Her ceiling literally caved in. The housing authority transferred her to Northeast DC to another public housing property. No hot water, no baseboards, no lights outside, just a mess. So people live in these not only conditions that threaten their physical well-being, it threatens their mental well-being. She testified yesterday and she's very strong. And we're going to talk about her in one of your questions coming up. But her thing was like, I am tired. I'm tired. I have 3 children. I've got a job. I'm tired. So, this is how people get beat up, and people sometimes will self-evict. Now what we're seeing unfortunately, after the pandemic is we're seeing, once again, much like I know many people cashed in New Orleans during the hurricane, what we're seeing in the district is a deluge of evictions where people simply can't catch up. They simply can't catch up. There's not enough programs to help them pay the balances that they have, even though there was a federal program. That money's gone, at least here in D.C. There is a local program that will only pay a certain amount, and people are at this place where even if they are able to pay the balance that they have, moving forward is the issue. So we see these many streams, these many levers that people get displaced, and it's all, somebody will benefit from that, right? When somebody is displaced from their apartment because they're evicted, the landlord can raise the rent higher than the rent control if it's under rent control. So there's just a lot of incentive to push people out, and that's what we've been seeing in the district. I mean, I think that's, you can't question that.
Right, and that's an interesting concept you brought up, self-eviction. Very, very challenging to comprehend. But some people are in a position where that happens. And I would say people who are forced to move out of the city, like you mentioned, PG County. My mom described it today as the 9th ward of DC. DC has 8 wards. PG County is that 9th ward because that's where so many people are forced to move out of when they are no longer able to afford the city, when they are in a position of being self-evicted as opposed to being forced out of the city. The next question, and I think, Saiga, you brought up a really good point about solutions. I think every conversation that we have on Unscripted Conversations, we talk about solutions, what we can do, because we're in this, right? We can't undo, or we can't just look at the situation as woe is me. We have to figure out how do we make it more equitable, right? If there's going to be development, how can it be sustainable for the people? So what do you all think can and should be done to help preserve the culture, the people in DC? And I want to start with Kelsey because we haven't heard from you in a little bit.
Well, and this kind of answers the villain question as well. So the collusion, though, unfortunately, in my opinion, is, again, that lack of DC statehood. So not having a voice in the Senate honestly matters in the gentrification conversation. And when we talk about preserving the land, the federal government can do that. When we talk about coronavirus and the CARES Act and running out of funds, the federal government would have allotted us those funds. Unfortunately, not having a voice in those conversations was detrimental. We saw a lot of businesses close in D.C. Most of those were black and brown businesses, and that's because 25% of the funds that were allotted during the CARES Act were allotted to districts and territories. Had we been allotted that 100%, we may see more black businesses right now. So when we talk about like actually pointing a finger, and I know he said it sounds like we're lobbying. We are lobbying because guess who use the same lobbyists? Senators, which again remind you we don't have one, and development companies. So the people who work on K Street work for JBG, and they also work for Senator Lindsey Graham. So keeping all this information in mind, unfortunately, the answer is clear, and it's 702 plus thousand residents living in D.C. We know the majority of them are black and brown, so it's just not coincidental that we are the only people who don't have a voice in Congress who are attached to this nation's land. And if we want to talk about preserving what that looks like and making that fabric look like us, then we need a voice in the conversation. So to be clear, the real reason is because we do not have a voice in our federal government. So the resources that we keep advocating for, including myself, I advocate literally every day. That's my occupation at this point. I went from a career profession fundraiser in federal government to an advocate. So I know firsthand that money is the root of the evil, and it's what changes things in this whole nation. And we're at a point where we need to be talking to, you say, other countries. We need to go to the United Nations ourselves and voice that this is a human rights epidemic against the citizens of D.C.
Wow, that's powerful. Yeah. That's a whole nother level of advocacy, taking this beyond the city, taking it beyond the country. Okay. Next, I want to hear from Daniel about what do you think can be done to preserve the culture, the people, the fabric of the city?
Yeah. I think, for us, we always say organize, right? Our thing is organize. People need to get organized, need to figure out what the issue is, how to fight it, and develop a plan to execute, right? So part of our work is not only to fight kind of, these big fights, but to really bring people together and either like uplift that those superpowers that they already have, or be able to help them develop them so they can be ready to fight, because we realize that we are fighting issues, but we could fight any issue to build people power, right? So we need to change that dynamic where the very rich are the ones that have all the power in the city. So, some for specific things around the very specific work that we do, or like around public housing, we're fighting for an actionable right of return. So people who get displaced are able to return, not, because they may be back on their rent, they will be out because they got caught with a J. Everybody else, you step outside, you're smelling it, right? A person in public housing gets caught with a J, they could be thrown out of the program itself. So we're also looking at how do we create homeownership opportunities for people in these redevelopments? How do they get a piece of the pie, some sort of equity? Because a lot of people benefit from all the money that gets thrown around. So, for example, at Berry Farm, the New Communities Initiative, the city, the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development, has invested all of the money into that development. The developer has not brought in one single cent. In fact, they get paid an administrative fee to move the project along, so called. So we need to, this is somewhat of a shift in philosophy and values, but we need to at the very least give directly impacted people a piece of that pie. So for public housing, what does that mean? Potentially something similar to TOPA, which is a Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. If this were a rent-controlled building and the owner decided to sell it, the tenants could have a chance to buy it or assign their rights, which is good because then you can negotiate. In public housing, people don't have that right. So all they have, is this opportunity to return to a potentially redeveloped property. So I think that's a big piece, is holding on to what we got, making sure that folks are, have the tools to fight these big fights, because these are big fights, right? We are fighting against a very well-resourced, I guess, these are adversarial. Let's not just mince words. They can be very adversarial. So we need to make sure that people who are directly affected have the tools, not only, the wherewithal of what to do, but how to play the system, because it's really a game. At Berry Farm, we were able to win the Court of Appeals. We filed a thing along with the tenants did this along with a local lawyer, Ari Teresa. We're able to get a very big decision that the Court of Appeals was questioning the development. They said, you're saying everybody can come back, but you're not building the same amount of units. People will still be segregated by income. People will lose, access to green space. So they questioned the project. The city just went and withdrew their planned unit development, which is the development agreement. And then they rezoned Berry Farm, so they didn't have to do a development agreement, right? So we used the game. We won to a certain amount at the game, and then they just changed the game, So I think that's part of it. Is really, and I think our work, little by little, like right now, the Office of the Attorney General is working to better help residents of the district understand zoning and the crucial role that plays.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And Saiga, from you, what do you think can be done in terms of preserving DC from a development standpoint? I think we talked about that a little bit, and I'd love to hear more.
I think what's great about these type of discussions, at least for me as a developer, I live hearing this right now, and that's going to allow us when I go back tomorrow and work. I'm always thinking, right? So even right now, I'm always saying, wow, I want to develop that piece of land that's far away from it. You guys have no clue where. I'm already thinking, how can I develop that? What is it going to look like? What is that community going to look like when it's finished, right? And it's important to understand the impact that we have as developers on the community, not just now, but 10, 15, 50 years from now. And so when you have conversations like this and it becomes real because you're hearing voices, I think it really helps paint a different picture. So as a developer, and I don't want to say just a developer, look, for this evening's conversation, I'm the developer, and I'm happy to advocate and talk about what we do. I can flip that hat in a second and be at their side as well, and be able to talk about the challenges that we face in communities. But at the same time, I think having this real conversation is important for developers. So when I say change, it's making it real for the people who are having to decide. I heard about developer fees for project and financing projects. Financing these projects is expensive, and it's difficult. And it's not, when you go buy a house, we all, for those who own homes or condos or whatever it is, you know how difficult that process is for just buying a house. Well, if you're doing a $50 million project, just imagine what that process looks like. So it's not easy for anyone. Right. But I think that hearing this conversation right now, for other developers, I guarantee you, if they really were able to see, are there opportunities to keep people in place? Are there opportunities to where financially it makes sense, meaning we can still do this project? I think those opportunities would be taken advantage of.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think a way for us to wrap too is to talk about who is doing some of the great work. Who are some of the champions? I know that each of you in your own way are advocating for the preservation of the people and the culture of the city. I know right now our mayor, who I did share, is very developer friendly. At the same time, she recently started an initiative entitled the Black Homeownership Task Force. And their goal is to increase Black homeownership by the year 2030. And they have a whole team. We wanted them to be a part of the conversation tonight, but they are still doing their investigations, and they weren't ready to speak yet. But they will have recommendations on how they plan to implement that program in October of this year. So who are some of the people, or what are some of the ways what are some of the positive ways that people can help on an individual level or on a systemic level? And another thing I do want to mention is the HPAP, the home purchase, I'm forgetting the A, but the HPAP program assistance, thank you. The HPAP program, that's a program that helped many people in my family buy their first house in DC. Just recently, they have expanded how much they're able to give to people. I believe it went from $80,000 to now $120,000. And so there are opportunities for people who are of lower income levels to stay in the city. And so we'd love to hear about more of the positive work that is being done in addition to your work, because you guys are all, doing your part as well. So anyone that you know that are champions for the people in this work.
I mean, I would just uplift the names of the women. I primarily work with black women in the district that are preserving and doing the work to save public housing. So I think these women are, and much like the history of this country, black women have been at the forefront of protecting culture, of moving the movement forward. So I think there are a lot of they're not the executive directors of organizations, but they are the leaders of tenant associations. They're the leaders of neighborhood groups, So I think we really do need to pay more attention to those voices and uplift those folks that are doing the groundwork. They're putting their shoulder to the wheel, putting their necks on the line to make sure that we hold on to what we have and we're leaving something better for those to come. So I think that's a big part of the work. I think also, I would encourage folks to join an organization. At the end of the day, there's a local rapper that did a song for us back in the day. He said, if you want to change your situation, you better join an organization. Wow. And that's nothing new. That's what Kwame Ture told us all, right? You want to organize, you want to change things, get organized, create, and join or join an organization.
Love that. Kelsey or Saiga, any champions that you want to uplift, or just recommendations for what people can do on an individual level, what can be done on a systemic level, but champions doing this work?
So similar motto, if you can't change their mind, change their seat. So get in touch with your council members and figure out what they're doing. And if they're not doing what you want them to do, again, organize and specifically mobilize once you organize. Because it is great to organize, but if it's just you and your friend for 2 or 3, months or so, you're probably not going to get too far. So you need to get some more people on your ship, and sail that ship. And sell it right on over to your council member. Have a list of demands. Be very specific. Let them know exactly what you're asking for. And know what you want as well. As far as a champion, other than, again, the local organizations, unfortunately for me, I don't have a champion to highlight for gentrification in D.C. It is rapidly increasing. I personally know, again, U Street Neighborhood Association, so Lee's Flower Shop, 1945, Ben's Chili Bowl, 1958. And me, I find myself the person who always has to go in these conversations and reiterate this information. And so that's also problematic for me. Unfortunately, I am managing a big festival this next Saturday. So timing-wise, this probably was not that conducive to my time. But as far as getting the message out for what's occurring in my own neighborhood, I find that I'm that voice. And so I continue having to find myself on the forefront of being that voice. So you yourself, if you can get involved with any fight, get involved with it, because all these social and racial justice issues intertwine some type of way, and they all affect all of us. They are considerably nonpartisan, because if you live somewhere, you're affected by something, regardless if you have money or not. So again, no champion for me for gentrification. I think we all, can just do a little better. And we can also ask our Congress, again, to co-sponsor our bill, H.R. 51, to get us some statehood, I'm going to always say that.
Definitely. Love that. And Saiga, any champions in the development world that are making an impact for the
a lot
better?
of developers out there that are making an impact. And I think a lot of them approach it in their own way. There's no one way to do things. I created a foundation several years ago. We give away a lot of money every year to different organizations, both here and overseas. I do free financial literacy courses, free webinars, how to create savings accounts, how to buy your first home. I do what I can and take my steps, but clearly this conversation has highlighted, obviously, an ongoing problem that is right now not going away. So for me, it's about how do I take this conversation, and the next time I'm speaking to one of my colleagues in the development world, sort of talk about this conversation, what we discussed. Does this pertain to what you're seeing, and so forth?
I just want to
Oh,
make
go ahead.
one more comment based off of that. So what I also find, as we know, my movement's kind of big or whatever. You have to meet people where they are. So unfortunately, with parents, unfortunately, like Saeed's coming to a group of people that I mobilize, they're not about to retain that information. Unfortunately, if you're hosting your financial literacy class or whatnot, they don't see the value in that conversation. And so when we say meet people what they are, it's not a cliche statement. It's literally make the information and the terminology that you want that group to retain palatable for that group. And so myself, I use artistic activism, and I've been pushing artistic activism. I know for a fact that artistic activism works. I've seen myself on the Shade Room, which is one of the biggest platforms on social media. And so I know artistic activism works. At the end of the day, people have to be more intentional about the group or groups that they want to receive the messaging that they want them to receive. And that, again, looks like connecting with those people who are already on the ground doing that work. It's great to give out money from your standpoint, but at the end of the day, that's what you would look like. You just look like you're giving money to nonprofits. Unless you're on the ground literally doing the work with them, like we've worked together multiple times. So we know that we cross paths often in the nonprofit space. And bigger corporate conglomerates, if they want to come into our space and really make it seem like they're providing resources for the people who are affected by the work that we're doing, then they have to work with the organizations who are already doing the work.
I think that's a good point and a good way for us to close out this conversation is that we all play a role in our interconnectivity as people who are advocating for the preservation of our culture and for the existence of our people in this city. We have to be on the same accord. We have to have more of these conversations. We have to be connected to one another. And like Saika said, when you go back to those development conversations, you're that voice for our people. You're that voice for us in front of Congress. You're that voice for us organizing our people on the ground. And so I think we all play our own role. So thank you so much, each of you, for being here tonight, but also for the work that you do every day. It's necessary and it's appreciated. So my last question for you all is, how can people find you? If they want to support the work that you're doing, they want to get involved in the organizations like Kelsey mentioned, and also Daniel mentioned, if they want to learn more about those financial literacy programs and how to bring that to their communities, right, to the people who are going to listen, how can people support you? How can they connect with you? So I'll start with Kelsey, and we'll go down.
I got a lot of handles. So my personal is myself at Miss Kelsey, MissKelsye, and that's on all social media platforms. Please note in the bio, it says views are my own, so they are my own, and I can say what I want to say. This is a free country, and it's my First Amendment right. I like to utilize that. As far as business, long live GoGo DC on all social media platforms, and also at DC Vote on all social media platforms. Also, Capital BOP, and that's capital with an A, on all social media platforms. I think that'll do it for all my socials.
Thank you.
You can find Empower DC. Just search Empower DC. Our website is empowerdc.org. Empower DC on all the social media platforms. Check out our radio show. We do a radio show every Tuesday on WPFW from 1 to 2 p.m. where we host several of these similar conversations. Just look us up online.
Social media handles at Saiga Thomas for free financial webinars, advice, SaigaThomas.com, courses, and everything else there. And then tableclothfinance.com is our consumer finance education company as well. So you can find more information there.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. That concludes our panel, but if we have a few moments, maybe we can take a couple questions from the audience. Panelists, how are you feeling?
Sure.
Good?
I have a question from the chat.
Okay, yes, if you can.
So we have a question from Sage Colbert, who asked, why is diversity seen as such a bad thing, and how can we as community residents aid in the inclusion of this process?
I think we have to be careful with the hijacking of movement vocabulary. right? So oftentimes what I'll see is this happened a lot with the school fight when the city decided to close a bunch of schools. Is we're just trying to create diversity, with housing. When they close down housing, we want to create mixed income neighborhoods. So it's this idea though that presupposes that the people that were there need something else to round out their communities, and the fact is that that does not need to happen. So we need to be careful on how we use these words and what the real meaning behind them is. It's usually to push forward an agenda that doesn't benefit Native, Indigenous people. So yeah.
Anyone else have thoughts? Okay. And I would love to touch on that as well, because just like Daniel mentioned, people hijack movements, hijack the narrative and try to twist it into another situation. We're not upset that new people are moving into Washington, D.C. Our biggest concern is the amount of Black people who have been uprooted, who have been displaced, who have been removed, right? Their lives are important. Their lives matter. And when our city has a plan to bring in thousands of new residents a month, what they're saying is that that is the priority, not the people who've been here for generations, who've been here for their entire lives. So if you look at it an example of a business, right? Imagine being a long-term customer of a business, and you give your money to them, you pay every month, and then the business is now recruiting new people, and they're ignoring you. They're just worried about getting new customers in. Like, I think that example hopefully it'll open up the eyes of people who are not from here and don't understand what it feels like to be treated like you're nothing in the city that you are from, to be uprooted and pushed out of something that you have been loyal to, right? That your ancestors have been a part of. So, again, to reiterate that point, we're not against diversity. Our priority is making sure that the people who are here, who are native to the city, are not removed. And we have a second question in the audience, in the live audience, and I'm going to pass the mic over.
Yes, as born and raised in Washington, D.C., it seems to be an attack against senior homeowners. So there is a group there's a group affiliated with Ron Brown's son, and I just found out about the Solomon Project, where homeowners are given these opportunities to have their homes remodeled, upgraded, and they hold on to their homes, and they're able to provide housing for others. Because I know of several seniors who have been scammed out of their homes. Unfortunately, I have been a victim of that. And I think there are lawyers in this city who are too buddy-buddy with these judges, who go behind behind that robe and say, "Oh yeah, I'll meet you at Martha's vineyard, my wife and I," and because I know these scams happen, and I think it's a shame that these fake people, people who look like they might represent us, but they don't, and then they go behind the scene and they do these things, and there are too many people who have who are fighting to hold on to their homes, and thank God for the group called Solomon's Project, because I think that's one avenue. And there's also the DC Black Workers Chorus that Sister Lucy Murphy and Dr. Karen Wilson have shown that through diversity, because people in that chorus are from everywhere, Venezuela, Chile, Argentina, California, North Carolina, everywhere. And the chorus sings at different events throughout the city. Like we just performed with POWAB, Places of Worship Advisory Board, and we were able to reach many, many people to let them know the struggle is on. If you need help and you need someone to come to voice through their singing to help get the message out, we can do it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I think we have time for one more question, and I'll pass it to J. Rick for that question.
Hi, good evening. So you alluded, gentrification is definitely prevalent all throughout the nation. And when I think of places like New York, it's, there's no doubt like places in Manhattan are $5,000 and, per month, no limit, there's no cap. I'm just curious in terms of gentrification abroad, is there a specific roadmap for people who are being displaced? And is there a year, or is there something that we should, as people or supporters, I guess what is there a roadmap with a specific outcome for people who are being displaced?
I think that's a great question, and that's something that organizationally I think we wrestle with, in the sense that because we're fighting the fight, it's hard to capture those, that history. So I think that's really important, that as we move forward, we do document what has worked, what has not worked. I am not aware of anything like specific that could be like something that's adapted around the world. I will say that I think it is really important, and that's, for us, it's been really important now as my organization has grown, we're about to be 20 years old, is how are we capturing the work that we've done? So I think that's really important, something I think, that as a movement, we really should work on and develop, these tools that really allow us to reflect on what has worked, what has not worked, and how do we move that forward.
Thank you for that. Thank you for answering that. Do we have any more questions from the online from the chat? Okay, so our folks on the chat. Okay, perfect. Any final questions from the studio audience for folks who are here? Thank you all for being here. We have time for one more, if there is. All right. Oh, wow, we have the youth. Oh, my gosh. This is one of my favorite young people. This is Tyson. Tyson is, I could give him a whole introduction, but I'm going to let him answer his question. But Tyson is just an incredible, talented young man. And I'm going to just pass you the mic because I know you have a lot to say.
Oh, well, my name is Tyson, and I'm a 10-year-old kid, but I've seen a lot. I've been through a lot, and the world is changed. I'm in D.C., so a lot of things happen. And this past week, there was a whole bunch of stuff, and I was going through my brain, and I was talking, I was wondering what goes on through these people's brain. But the thing is, it's not the people, it's the way the people around them act. Growing up in Richmond, D.C., and Maryland, I've seen a lot. And at my school, it's very diverse. A lot of people go through different things. And I came from a restaurant down the street, and we were talking, and I asked, how can we change, this world? And there's so many things that you can do, but at the same time, you really don't know how to do it. There's many options that you can choose from, but I'm not going to get into that. What I'm about to do is, diversity is a big thing in this world, and I was wondering, what could you do to, change how the people use the people that give them money. So this building that we're in right now, they give the world money, or the government money, so they could do other things. But the government chooses to do things they want that really affect the people in the areas that they work for. And the presidents, we control the presidents, if you think about it, because we give them the money so they can make more money, because there's factories to make money, there's factories to make the things that help other people make money, like these tables around us, the couches, the lights. All these people have made money from doing other things, and the government has a lot of things to do with it. Because a lot of my friends, we talk about stuff, and we think COVID is a reason to cause Jesus. Okay. Me and my friends went through a project for school, and we thought that COVID started because of the government, because they have all these things to make this. They have all the things to make the cure. So that means that they have all the things to make what is the creation of the cure. So the cure is for COVID. So that means that they made COVID so people could buy the cure and the vaccines so they could get more money, because the world is going down profit. I mean, you look in Chicago, you look in New York, you look in Florida, you can look anywhere really. When I went to Texas, I saw that it was way run down than what I remember. And when I went back to Richmond, I saw it was very run down than what I remember. Because when I was in Richmond, it was still ran down, but there was still life in it. When I went back, I mean, the people, there was a lot of homeless. I mean, and the thing is, the homeless people don't deserve what they get. They take the things that they take, spend the money on the things that they're not supposed to, because they really don't have another option. These people that are controlling them for no reason are taking away their lives. That's all.
Wow, thank you, Tyson. You brought up a lot of points. You talked about the profiteers from the pandemic. You talked about the homeless community, which is growing in so many cities. As we see the rise of luxury buildings, we see the increase in homelessness. So Tyson brought out a lot. I don't know if you had a specific question, Tyson, but I think I remember him asking about just how we can live together more peacefully. I think he mentioned something about that, about diversity. And I think what we touched on earlier may address that. Also want to keep the floor open in case anyone had a response to anything Tyson mentioned.
I want to shout out Tyson. Tyson, that was such a wonderful spiel you just gave us. I'm so glad you're in tune with what's going on. I actually have a curriculum in high school. It's called GO-GO, Human Rights and Social Action. So I appreciate, the youth trying to figure out how to be politically involved. I feel like, though, your question was, how do you continuously be the change with all the people around you having wild stuff going on, right? Am I right? And so I'm going to take a line out of a book, and this one's from Gandhi, so we all know this one. You be the change that you want to see in the world. So your friends are mirrors. They're more than likely going to do what you do. Birds of a feather, they do flock together, unfortunately. So, and I say unfortunately because if one person's doing something bad, his group of friends or her group of friends are probably going to be bad. But if the one person is good, 9 times out of 10, the rest of the group is going to be good. I'm glad, though, that you picked up on something about the COVID. I don't know if you really picked up on it, but you picked up on something. And you are right with drugs and the whole pharmaceutical whole lane in this country. So Big Pharma, if you ever get the opportunity to read up on these people, they're called Big Pharma. And that's an actual group of people. And you are right. They are here to displace black and brown people. It was this thing called the War on Drugs. And Big Pharma was one of the big pockets behind that. And so they were just dropping drugs in black and brown neighborhoods to essentially, unfortunately, I know you 10, but kill people that look like me and you, bro. And so I'm glad that you are recognizing this now. So what I'm telling you is you have an opportunity at 10 to constantly be a voice. So my job is to encourage the youth to come out. I'm not the youth anymore. So I don't know how encouraging I am. I try to bring some tight entertainment and hope that they, get involved with that and then be like, okay, well, what else can I do? But for you to already, trying to figure out what to do, the one thing I ask for you is to continue doing what you're doing.
Yes, Ashe.
That's right.
Thank you. Yes, Tyson, keep using your voice. And as everybody on this panel mentioned, they are using their voice in a different way, whether it's Saiga, going back and being the advocate for the people in those conversations, in those rooms with other developers, whether it's Daniel, again, advocating for the people directly on the ground, in the streets, fighting for people, and whether it's Kelsey, who is advocating for statehood for all of our people in this city. We all have a role to play. And so I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for your work. Thank you to all of our audience who asked questions, and for everybody for just being here. We do have a member of the community here tonight who, hello, how are you? Wanted to make sure that he gets some shine. He is an unhoused individual, and he works with the Street Sense newspaper. Well, I'm sorry, you work with Street Sense, you sell Street Sense newspapers, and that's a newspaper that is created by the unhoused, and those individuals who do sell the paper, they are able to earn income through that program. So we are going to wrap the program, but we will have an opportunity for everyone here in the live audience to have a conversation and patronize his business with Street Sense. So thank you all to our panel for being here. Again, thank you for our audience online and in person. And this has been Unscripted Conversations. Have a good night.